Yeah. We'll start with the low-hanging fruit. Welcome. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the pod. This episode, we're going to touch a bit more on something that's quite topical that we've obviously reviewed in the past, which is AI adoption. And specifically, some recent reporting that was done by Statistics Canada that shows that Canada, although they've improved, they've gone from about 6% usage to about 12% in the last year across the small medium enterprise space. It's obviously lagging, especially other OECD countries. And we like to compare ourselves to the US, and I think that's a valid goal, but we obviously don't have a lot of the technology centers, specifically Silicon Valley. And so it's probably not a fair comparison. If we were to look at somewhere in Western Europe, it'd probably be more applicable. But in any event, our adoption is way down. And I would provide, or I would theorize that a big part of that is what I would consider to be technical literacy. I think everybody's familiar with, financial literacy and understanding, debt and finance, equity, sort of, personal finance metrics and investments. But I think a lot less is spoken about technology literacy, especially amongst, we'll call them, sub 50 years right now. So maybe Gen Z and below. And what sort of an impact that has, especially in the commercial world. So, SMB owners or senior management, where they potentially they're not making investments in technology because they're not comfortable with them, or they perceive that the risk or the cost is not sufficient to make the investment or to make the changes to the business. And then inversely, there was a really interesting conversation between Chamath Palihapitiya, who's he's a VC, he's done a bunch of work in the technology space in the US. He was on stage in Toronto with the CEO of Shopify. And he was essentially describing, some of those concerns where software has become this juggernaut, this, industrial complex where companies have purchased, especially large enterprises, have purchased these packages at tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in cost. And they've been sold this bill of goods that they've essentially had to reorganize their organizations in order to accommodate this use case. And his argument is that that's, it's all for naught. It's not actually helping the product. It's not helping the service. So, we can try and balance those two ideas in terms of, should people be investing? How do they invest? While at the same time acknowledging that there's potential, overspend and over complexity in the same areas. So, I guess, off the top, what are you guys' thoughts on the level of, technical literacy in Canada, especially in the business sector? You guys obviously are on the higher end of tech literacy, especially because of the way you've built your business. But what would you say your perspective is on Canadians?
Yeah, I could just firstly, like Chamath, was he speaking to Farhan, the head of engineering at Shopify, or the CEO of Shopify?
CEO. He was speaking to his name escapes me.
Yes, Lou? Tobias.
Tobias. Is that it? Oh, it's funny because I was just listening to a seminar from Shopify as well. I shared it with Andrew. It was with Farhan Fowler. He's the head of engineering at Shopify, and he was talking about how they're just so bullish on AI, and even with their staff, how they're so heavy on having their staff utilize AI. He has not just his tech staff. I'm talking about even operations staff, sales staff, across the organization, they're all utilizing the fully paid versions of various LLM models, whether it be Anthropic, whether it be, OpenAI's, whether it be Musk's, which is Grok. But they're going for the fully paid version, like the top of the line, of $300 a month version, and he was bullish on saying that, why wouldn't you use that? He goes, the things you can accomplish with that are endless. And the output you're getting from some of these higher end models, or these more premium models that have the power, the compute power, are unbelievable. So I think it comes down to, first though, you have to have that in the culture. So Shopify's created a culture of this. A lot of organizations are just scratching the surface on AI. And now it's not a matter of adoption, but I like what you put as tech literacy. I think that's what it comes down to, is there's such a disparity, such a discrepancy and disparity in how individuals are using AI. There's some individuals or some businesses that, have most of their staff have some form of interaction with AI, but it could be like they're still writing one-line prompts, single-line prompts, like basic prompts, like, hey, can you write this email for me? Or, hey, can you read this, give me a summary of this report or this proposal? However, then on the other end of the spectrum are individuals that, have that tech literacy or that comfort or have advanced, where they're doing really advanced things with AI. So I think if it's embedded in the culture and you have a team that is starting to build that level of comfort with using the tools that are at their disposal, then you could start to really do amazing things, and you could start to explore these more premium products. Because right now, I think for the basic, it's free. Then there is the paid version, which is about $30 a month. Correct me if I'm wrong, 30 USD a month, more or less, which gets you, a little bit more powerful model. And then he's at the other end of the spectrum where, hey, I want all my staff having access. It's very costly, by the way. Having access to this $300 a month Super Grok or the Chat GPT. I think what's their highest one paid?
Grok Heavy.
Yeah,
No,
Grok
for
Heavy.
OpenAI. OpenAI's
ChatGPT. I think Pro.
Pro.
I think the Pro, and there's the other one's the Grok Heavy. So those are the heavy hitter models.
Correct. So it comes down to how people are using them. There's such a disparity there. I think organizations are trying to get to that level where they're pushing their staff to, it's kind of that thing where we talked about in previous episodes. You have this tool at your disposal. If you don't use it, you're at a disadvantage. But now it's coming down to everyone's using it. Now it's how you're using it. And I think that will lead into Andrew to talk about this. But I think that's very important with you. Everyone has this tool. Now it's a matter of how you're using the tool to gain an edge over your competition.
So just a quick point there. You touched on something that's really quite interesting, and that was the culture aspect. So I think we've all stumbled across this when it happened. So this was a few months ago this year, but the CEO, Tobias Lütke, said they're going forward. This was in the spring, that they're an AI first company. So there were some things he essentially wrote what they're calling a manifesto, that AI is mandatory for all employees. So there's a few points that he touched on. So first and foremost, AI proficiency is required. So using AI effectively is no longer optional. It's baseline expectation for every employee, no matter their role. He acknowledged it was a major shift in how the company operates and thinks. You have to justify not using AI. So employees must explain why AI can't be used before asking for additional resources. Stagnation is seen as failure. Everyone is encouraged to keep learning and experimenting with AI. AI in product development should be incorporated right from the start during prototyping phase of all projects. Speed up learning, testing, and teamwork. And they include AI usage in performance and peer evaluations. So how well employees adopt and use AI will influence how they're assessed and rewarded, including promotions. So it's like incredibly geared. And that actually, when that was released, I remember there was quite a negative response to it, because people were like, this is a sea change. This is a total reinvention of how this, a company will operate. So it's a really interesting point in saying, here from the top, we are first and foremost AI driven, and we're going to give you, to your point, we're going to spend the money that's required to give you all the best tools. Use those tools as best you can.
Yeah, that culture is important. And then, so they're incentivizing, they're equipping, incentivizing their employees to use it, and they're training them on it as well. Like I mentioned earlier to Andrew, like with that, they have prompt libraries. They have prompt libraries that they share with the organization, and they do a lot of like vibe coding, very basic vibe coding, where not just developers are using it to code, but he has like they have product people using it for basic prompt, the basic coding. I think it's just ways to query data, to be honest. But they're I'm not too technical on that side, but they're starting to use these tools to really create this powerhouse, and there's lots of synergy by using it.
I think you guys really kind of covered a lot of bases, leaving me with very little to speak about. But yeah, I agree with you.
Answer this, Andrew. Like, if you wanted to create that, not necessarily create that culture, but if you wanted an organization, you got pulled into an organization. They said, Andrew, help this team utilize AI to scale up. And I know it's a very broad question, so you could take it wherever you want. But you're going into an organization and you see that they're not using AI to its not even half of its benefit. What would you start suggesting? What are some low hanging fruit you would recommend to them?
I think it's it's obviously a lot tougher to to do it to make these kind of changes to an existing organization. But I would start with all new hire. I would go and essentially put out the mandate that every new hire that gets hired will have a test, and we would like to see how they work with AI in general, right?
So like an AI aptitude test sort of
Yeah,
thing?
like an AI aptitude test, how they prompt. I would give them a problem, for example, and ask them to use AI to come up with a solution, and only AI to give me the solution. This would give me the ability to see whether they are comfortable with prompting AI, because it is a skill. After using AI for this long, I do realize that prompting AI is very difficult. It's not simple at all, right? So a simple prompt can give you some answers, but there's hallucinations and all these things that can happen. So it can be very challenging to get the right response from the AI. So I would definitely give them a problem, and I would give them the AI tool and make them solve that. So all new hires have to be extremely comfortable with using AI. And yeah, like I'd say, the going back to your point, Mike, start implementing a culture that rewards AI usage, right? Where it's not a shame to use AI, right? Because there seems to be this weird belief and weird mentality that, hey, you know what? You used AI for that, right? Oh, well, the AI, it gives me a really good response, so why not use it?
Hmm. Hmm.
Change the culture, change the mentality that, hey, if you generated this with AI, I'm extremely impressed with it. Like, and not the response that, oh, you'd use AI for that. You shouldn't be using it. And kind of putting it down in a way, right? So I would change that culture. I think it's important to change to get rid of that culture, and then to go one step further, I would start embedding AI into the process as much as possible. Basically, if there's any point in the process where you can implement AI, it forces the user to utilize AI. I would also do that as well. So these things would definitely have the uptake in AI usage. So in our system, for example, uh, what we started measuring is the AI. We're trying to measure the AI usage versus manual task, and then we're measuring the average time to perform a specific task. And this would allow us to see how efficient certain people are, and if they're actually optimizing their AI usage, right? So we're doing those kind of things. We're really measuring the AI usage at Boardwalk, and that's really kind of how I would probably implement AI into any organization. I would start there.
So how do you bridge the gap? So if we come back to the original concern, which was we on a broad spectrum basis across the country, people that are in leadership positions that are making those types of decisions are not adopting AI at all. So again, we're at 12%. So we're a significant distance from being a sort of a Shopify culture. But you also have a technical understanding and background. So what would you suggest is a good way to bridge that gap for people that are saying, "Hey, I know roofing. I don't know technology. I don't know what areas that it's good at, and frankly, they don't have the confidence or the capital to take a bunch of swings and misses on implementing some of these solutions."
Well, it definitely does stem at leadership. You're right, Kyle. Like, it's top down. It's a top down. The culture really drives it. The people that are doing the hiring, that are doing the incentivization. So to answer your question, there are companies that come in and do these sort of things where they bring in this kind of AI training and AI adoption, and they kind of it's kind of like a consulting firm, very expensive. Very expensive. So this the problem with that option is like a lot of companies, like you said, can't afford to pay that, or don't necessarily want to afford it because they don't know what the outcome or the benefit will be. It's hard for them to quantify. So I think there just needs to be more more kind of groups available that businesses can join, groups geared at tech adoption and tech enablement. So local groups, like how there's these BI and I groups, they're starting to spring up. So there's got to be more of that. Courses people can take, business leaders, things that business leaders can go in, or future business leaders can enroll in, so they can start to really understand what you can do with AI, get comfortable with AI, and start to try to find ways to embed it in their organization. So that's something I've been toying with. Like the group, I'm part of a leadership group. And it's not an AI group, it's just a leadership group, but we all understand, everyone in the group understands that AI is moving so quickly and it has to be adopted or you'll be left behind. So a lot of our discussions, like we'll bring in people to talk about AI. We'll give examples of how we're using AI in our organizations. Everyone has their own business and they're saying, hey, this is how I've adopted AI, or this is how we're tracking it. This is what we're doing. Oh, let's bring in someone to talk about AI, an expert. So I think there needs to be more of that happening for that adoption rate to come up, Kyle. That's one way. I'm sure you guys have other ideas.
I guess my take on that is if you really want to increase adoption for businesses, the way I like to think about it is not just the culture of the business, but the culture of our society. I think the issue is, our society is not very accepting of some of these more advanced technology, things that are more contrarian, things that are too sci-fi. They're just not willing to accept and take that risk. And I think it's that culture that you're willing to accept risk as well. Like that's why when you look at some of the tech hubs out in the world, like Silicon Valley, Singapore, for example, has this tech hub. Some of these, they bred this culture where you want to be advanced, you want to be innovative, you want to think, 5 years ahead. Because I can tell you this right now, this AI conversation was really like probably 8 years ago. Like I've been thinking about AI since like 2015. So for a lot of business leaders didn't even think that there was a possibility of having AI in 2015. And that's when, going back to our journey at Boardwalk, is that when we started Boardwalk, we had that vision already. We knew that there's advancement coming down, and data, having ownership of the data is so important. So having that set up, it allows us to implement AI in a much faster, more efficient way, that now we can reap the benefit. But you're right, Kyle, going back to your question, a lot of business leaders don't have that long-term vision. So you know what? I'm going to go for something off the shelf. Data is not priority. So now 5 years down the road, when the discussion of AI pops up, it's like, oh, how do I even implement this? This is going to be very costly. And then you're going to have to go to a consultant, like Mike's saying, very expensive. Hire this consultant to try to implement AI in some possible way into your business, and it's like makeshift at that point. It's not really embedded into your business anymore because you never had that vision from the start. So I think society needs to change. We need to adopt this thinking where, hey, you know what? Let's look out 5 years down the road. What are the technologies that's going to exist 5 years down the road? Not what exists today. It's a very reactive approach. We need to take a more proactive approach. That's how you're going to stay ahead of the curve.
So, but do you guys feel like we could look at any technology in the last 20 years, and generally speaking, Canadians are quite bad at investing in new technologies. They're bad at investing in businesses generally. But do we think that it's a risk? It's an aversion to risk, or do we feel like it is the belief that this actually doesn't fit my business? So there's going to be two sorts of owners where one is saying, I don't understand it and I don't want it, or I don't believe that the risk is worth the cost. And there's going to be a second group that potentially says, I've seen this technology and I understand it, and I don't want it because I don't think it's going to do what I want. So we can look at automation. So years ago, I was at a private equity event, and they were talking about the level of automation in agriculture, because it's obviously in Alberta, agriculture is a huge industry. And it was interesting because a couple of the speakers from the investment side essentially said they're seeing two different worlds. They're seeing farmers that are saying automation and technology are the future, like to your point, what you just made. We see this as being table stakes in the next 20 years, so we need to get in front of it right now. And then the opposite group was essentially the polar opposite, where they said we don't need the technology. The technology is not going to do anything for us, or what it does do for us is not worth the cost. So the change or the investment, the whatever the adoption cost is, and we're going to keep doing what we're doing, and we're going to be competitive with the technology because we're better than it in certain ways. So what is your perspective on that?
I think it's a combination of things. You know, there's some aversion to risk. There's some aversion to change. Canadians do not change very easily. Like if the wheel ain't broke, why fix it? So a lot of individuals have that mind frame, like, hey, you know what? I'm generating all kinds of profit. Revenues. I'm profitable. Business is going well. Why do I need to change anything? Like a story of RIM. So this is a common theme we see, so that could be part of the reason. But I think a lot of people just don't know how to do it at this point. Like they're at a point of their career where they've done it without AI for so long that now they're overwhelmed. They're like, okay, now I need to change my business and make like Andrew said, how are you just going to insert AI into your business all of a sudden? I think that's poses a big challenge for a lot of people. It's just like, where do they start? Where do I start with this?
Exactly, and that's why I think is taking this very open-minded approach is very important, right? Being open-minded right from the onset about regarding any technology, right? And for me, I think I've always taken that approach where I don't dismiss any technology. I question it. I ask the question, and do not dismiss this as an opportunity to disrupt your industry, your business, right? I think one of the earlier podcasts, I spoke about tokenization of real world assets, and it was an opportunity, and all of a sudden now we're talking, probably that was like 4 months ago or a couple months ago, and now it became a real topic. I think everybody on Wall Street is talking about tokenization of real world assets, and I like I said, I think really have to take that contrarian mindset and think about what is possible with the existing technology. Like Mike and I had a conversation last week, is that why is Tesla and all of Elon Musk's technology so successful? It's because his technology he's trying to build is to get him to Mars, right? Like everything he's doing is essentially trying to get to Mars. So all the technology he's building right now is with that in mind, and it's really far out there. It's so sci-fi that we don't even think it exists, but it exists.
And he's completely vertically integrated too, like we
You're
talked
saying
about.
this, yeah, that's a good point, Mike. So, but you're saying, Andrew, is that because he's taking these big swings, because he's taken a lot of big swings, and I think he's well known for hitting the most big swings of anybody, which is very, very, very hard to do. But you're saying that part of the reason that people are so enamored with him is because he's taking these big swings.
I think it's just it's just that approach that you have to believe the technology can get there, like and it's like, how can we get there? It's not like a lot of the people I've spoken to, most of them about any kind of new technology, they always question it. Like, yeah, it's not going to be able to do it. Like,
Tell them about the Waymo cars when we were in California,
like
driving around.
5 years ago, Mike, like we talked about self-driving cars, and it was so
People still don't believe it. I was telling friends and family that we were in these driverless cars in LA, and they're like, yeah, those things don't work. They don't work. They're driving on the opposite side of the road. They're going over curves. I said, no, they're not. Like they don't buy into it.
That's the perfect example. That's one example. Okay. And I can give you multiple examples of these things. Okay. Bitcoin's another example. Early days, they said this thing is being used for criminal usage or whatever, for drugs and all that thing. Now it's sitting inside countries like treasuries, inside their reserve. It's a reserve currency now for a lot of country. So, that has changed. The internet is another one. early days in the internet, I remember people, were talking about the internet was used for all these these bad things, and now look at the internet. It's the basis of everything that we do. So all of these technology, there are always these people that really question it and don't really believe in it. And then there's the other party who really believe in the technology and ask the questions like, how can we get there? We have these existing technology. How can we get, to this next point, essentially? Elon Musk is probably doing the same thing. Is that, right now we have this technology. How can we get ourselves to Mars? And now he has all these things, like think about it, like solar power, energy storage. He has, what else is there, Mike?
Robots.
SpaceX, robots,
The manufacturing capability is the greatest, one of the greatest assets that he has right now,
Yeah,
because
all of these things.
that's prepared him to do everything. Like,
Exactly.
and,
Mike,
that's something that can't be replicated. He has all that manufacturing capacity now. So, once the technology catches up, he can just basically flip a switch and produce hundreds and hundreds of thousands of autonomous vehicles, of robots, whatever it may be.
So maybe speak to that, Mike, because you touched on a really interesting point that I hadn't heard about recently or before until recently, which is that the level of integration between his companies. And the example was essentially when xAI, which is the AI Grok part company, which actually isn't part of Tesla, it's not part of SpaceX. He needed to build essentially a compute center, data center, and what he did is he brought in manufacturing chops and engineers from his other companies that had essentially been involved with building out Tesla's production, and they built arguably the most advanced supercluster currently available today. And they were able, we talked about this before, they were able to get past the GPU cluster ceiling. Like they did a whole bunch of firsts. And based on what I heard, a lot of that was credited to the fact that he had all of this talent available within his companies. So that's a very interesting, and we've also talked about the fact that Tesla, for example, has built all of their software. So they have generated and internally created every single piece of software they've required. So
yeah, no, it's unbelievable the amount of vertical integration that they've created in that organization. Like if you think about it, you're right. They have the software, they have the hardware, they have the services in terms of the internet, they have the energy with solar and battery power. So they basically they're preparing to deliver end to end. There'll be no bottlenecks in the process. So, for example, with AI and these autonomous vehicles, a bottleneck, once the technology is there and it's very close, a bottleneck could be production. But Tesla, has already thought that through and has already built all these massive production facilities where they can just flip a switch and start producing these vehicles. Well, they already have produced a lot of these vehicles, but now they can start producing these robots. Same with going to space, like Andrew said, they want to go to Mars. They built the rockets with SpaceX, so they have the technology that can get them into space. They have the satellites up there that have the connectivity.
One thing I want to add there, Mike, is they not only did they build a rocket, they built a rocket that can carry a massive load into space. Why? Because they want to carry a bunch of robots to Mars.
And it can land too. That rocket can land. It has landing capabilities.
Yes.
One of the first.
And that's why, like otherwise everybody else is building small little rockets here and there that's bring up small loads. Why did this guy wants to build such a big ass rocket? That's because he want to bring in massive load into space. So that's why we have the technology that we have today, right? And Mike, I speak about this a lot, but I think the humanoid robot aspect of Tesla is going to be the biggest business for them. And I think a lot of people in the past that I've spoken to mistaken Tesla as a car company, and I say it many times, Tesla is a robotics company, and finally it's starting to resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, it's all about looking at where the puck is going. So bringing this back, look at where the puck is going, not where it is. And I think businesses can do this with technology. Seeing where AI is now, Imagine where it's going to be. Imagine, just look 3 years out. Imagine 5 years out, how different things will be. So you need to start thinking about this and thinking about how is my business going to fit into this new society 5 years from now, when there's robots walking around and they're colonizing Mars. AI is replacing humans with agentic AI. Yeah, you need to start thinking about these things.
So one point I wanted to bring up, which I find quite contradictory to this topic, is there's a statistic. So I think most people are familiar with foreign direct investment, or FDI. So foreign direct investment is essentially foreign dollars that originate outside of Canada and they're spent in Canada. So that primarily in the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of that driven by the resource sector. So, a company like Shell, which is was domiciled in Holland, but now they're domiciled in the UK, they'll invest X millions or billions of dollars in building wells or facilities or whatever in Canada. And that counts towards foreign direct investment. A big one in the last 10 years has been, well, questionably whether or not it's actually been spent, but the commitments to making, for example, EV battery manufacturing in Ontario. So a lot of foreign car manufacturers investing in Canada. So if you look at the foreign direct investment flows over the last 20 years, it's been pretty flat. There was a massive drop off, obviously, for the financial crisis, and then there was another drop off in 2015, which I would attribute mostly to the resource cost. The fact that oil fell off a cliff, and there was a lot of projects that got shelved. But most importantly, in the last 3 years, so this is post-pandemic, we've seen the highest inflows in about 2021 at 60 billion US, and we're down to 40 billion last year. So the trajectory is quite bad. And if you compare that to the inverse, which is essentially Canadian money being spent somewhere else, we see the opposite picture. So we see Canadian, the statistic for this is Canadian direct investment abroad. And in 20 years ago, so 2005, the number was about 430. And last year, 2024, it was almost 2,000 or 2 trillion. So it's essentially over 4x what it was 20 years ago. Whereas our FDI, if we compare the same number of the same time period, it's less than doubled. So essentially, and again, we're trending down. Like where we sit today is less than double where it was 20 years ago. So, the reason I find this difficult to comprehend is that we perceive the Canadian economy and the drivers of the Canadian economy to be quite risk averse. Yet we're spending 4 times more than we've spent in the last 20 years, most ever, far and away the most ever, in foreign investments. So we're putting our money, and I'm personally I'm guilty of this. The vast majority, if not all, of my investments are denominated in US dollars. NASDAQ traded companies, technology, stuff like that. Those are all primarily high risk technology investment type organizations. And so I find it really challenging to understand, Canadians don't want to spend that money domestically, but they're happy to spend it in investing in foreign companies. And there's clearly a certain amount of risk. We wouldn't otherwise be making the profits and the revenues if there wasn't any risk. So how do we reconcile that? And is it simply a matter of there are not enough Shopify's? Because obviously Shopify have done extremely well in the Canadian market, arguably less well than they would have done if they were a US based company. We've just, one other point is we've heard recent talk and legislation around forcing Canadian mutual funds and retirement funds to invest in Canadian companies. So they have to allocate a certain percent of the proposal is that they have to allocate a certain percentage of their portfolio to Canadian equities, because we've seen this capital flight. What are your guys' thoughts on that in this sort of discussion in terms of how do we grow a Musk-esque type empire in Canada when we're clearly investing it in the US?
I'm going to just make a quick comment, and then Mike, I'm going to let you speak, and then I'll talk. But
No, go ahead.
I think it's partly I'm going to tell you this: the brain drain is real. Okay, Elon Musk was once in Canada. There's tons of people that are very innovative that have left Canada. Another one that comes to mind: the founder of Ethereum, one of the
Yeah.
co-founders of Ethereum.
Vitaly, yeah, Vitaly, he was actually in Edmonton, which is where I'm from. His family's from Edmonton.
Yeah, he went to Waterloo for 1 year and then he left the country. Went to Switzerland, I believe now. He would try to go to the US, but then Switzerland.
He's in Singapore right now,
Yeah,
based in
so
Singapore.
yeah, so now he's in Singapore. You see, like it's true. Like, why didn't we retain these talents? Why didn't they build the technology here? Like, why do they have to go to these other countries? And
So it's interesting, just quickly on that point, it's ironic because based on public information, what I've heard is he built a large portion of that and he had a lot of family help. His father apparently was quite well, wouldn't say invested in the technology, but very knowledgeable. So this wasn't like a layman walking into, crypto.
his dad was
But
very knowledgeable.
he built a lot of Ethereum, a lot of the foundation, and he did a lot of the theoretical work, like you say, at Waterloo. And so the question is he actually built a lot of that in Canada, but again, he left that the brain drain. He found a reason to leave. There was justification to leave, and that's a big issue.
Well, let's face it, guys. Like, we all know the answers. We know the answers. The environment is not as favorable here to thrive. First off, the tax jurisdiction. The taxation, how it works here. There's heavy taxes on any form of income you're making here. Capital gains not so bad, but definitely income. So a lot of people, go for more favorable tax jurisdictions is number one. Number two is access to capital. We talked about this many times. Access to capital because Canadian banks are very conservative. There's not a lot of investors that are investing in Canadian companies. But this comes back to your question, Kyle. How do we get more investors investing money into startups and companies? Even the banks. Think about, like Andrew and I were talking about this last week, like the big five banks or whatever it is, they control so much of the market and the flow of capital, and they're so conservative, and they have an oligopoly. It's difficult to make moves. In the US, it's more decentralized. There's all these, different banks, so many banks that have a more business savvy, business forward approach where they're willing to take on risk and willing to make some bets. So like those are just two of the reasons. The other reason, there's a plethora of reasons. The other thing is just access to talent and market size. That's another thing. A lot of people go to the US because there's just so much access to a broader talent pool. There's more customers, more users. They spend their money. What would be an interesting fact to pull up is consumer spending. If the consumer, I believe, I'd like to get this fact, I'll probably pull it, but consumer spending is much higher in certain countries than in Canada, especially in the US. So it's a little bit easier for businesses to launch and pick up customers. I was just talking to someone doing lead gen. Actually, they're doing lead gen for us, and they did lead gen in the US. They said the response rate from their email campaign for insurance was as high as 11% on their emails in the US. Say, hey, do you want to get a quote on your insurance? 11% response rate. Here in Canada, under 3%. Under 3%. So why? Why is that? Why? So there's just so many things going on, but it is very difficult. All these reasons make it difficult, and a lot of investors don't want to invest here because they can't get the returns. They can't get the returns they're looking for. Why do you invest in the States, Kyle, on the NASDAQ, on the S&P 500? Because you have those businesses, those unicorns, those Mag 7s that you can invest in where you're seeing those returns.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really interesting point, and that is market size, because we're guilty of this as well, where we sought investment and we found it in the US, partially because the market is so much larger. And we are focusing on customers in the US because it's like everything that you just described. Like it's a bigger pond to fish out of. And I just pulled up a quick Perplexity estimate on per capita consumer spending for 2025. And so these are in US dollar figures, but Canada's at roughly 43,500. And the US is at 60,000.
There you go.
It's almost 50% more, which is shocking. Like that's huge difference.
I feel it. They spend money. Like the Canadians just hold on to every dollar.
It's a huge difference. Huge. It's way more than I would have guessed. But obviously, one of the points that they comment on in this is that they attribute partially that's a result of higher incomes, right? They have far higher disposable incomes. Cost of living is much less. Especially like you're saying, low tax jurisdictions are your take home is significantly higher than Canada. So it's and that gap is widening, right? We've talked about this before. That gap has been increasing for the last 15 to 20 years. And so it's a vicious cycle where people don't want to spend money. They're risk averse. They're not going to make money because companies aren't making money. Companies aren't making money. They're not paying people. People aren't spending money. Companies aren't investing in technology because they're not making money. So it's a really, we're all sort of stuck in that hamster wheel.
It's listen. It's just that in that culture that we have.
Talk
here.
about the red tape too, Andrew. The red tape. Like,
Yeah,
what
the stuff that I complained to you about, right?
yeah. Tell him. What do you complain about?
Well, I think there's tons of red tape that exists in Canada, and I think that stifle a lot of innovation, right? A lot of these companies, I'm gonna let's just okay, bringing back Ethereum again, probably Vitalik. There was probably a bunch of red tape that prevented him from actually starting a crypto company in Canada, for example. Probably pushed him to another country to start working on this project that he's really passionate about, right? And then there's access to a certain type of investments, right? Like the one that something I was telling Mike about is that I guess in the early days of crypto, there was like a lot of regulations and red tape around investing in certain crypto, and there was like a weekly limit, right, Mike? Like a weekly limit of like a couple $100 you can put into this thing, and this is of your own money. Like this is not like buying off of your credit card or anything like that. And it's just that to me is like now there was this say, there's someone that really believed in Bitcoin or whatever. They couldn't have invested that significant amount of money in there because there's regulations and all these like requirements. What if, and then the other thing is, what if you want to invest in a startup, right? Something I was telling Mike about is there's all these startups that I want to invest in, and there's no access. Meanwhile, in the U.S., they have all kinds of different vehicles, like they have different platforms like Robinhood that's trying to tokenize, startups like SpaceX and OpenAI and allow public to have access to them. And there's like SoFi that's also doing something similar. And there's specific funds that are being launched specifically on these platforms that are only available in the US. So how are Canadians supposed to get access to these things? You can't. So there was this ARK venture fund that I was looking into. I was showing Mike about this, and I'm like, I can't get access to this thing. I'm like, why? I want to invest in this thing, and I can't. So going back to your question, Kyle, like as Canadians, we don't have access to these things. Like I want to invest in something that will yield a return for me, and I have the risk appetite, but for some reason, I can't invest my own money. And I have to invest in a very specific way in Canadian bonds or something, which is terrible, right? Like it's absolutely absurd to me. It's like they're trying to protect the investors, but it's doing more harm now. Because and the last thing I want to answer your question, Kyle, is that I think there's some things that the Canadian market has done right, and that's there's certain crypto ETF that they've done in the past, which was a bit more advanced in the US because now the US is starting to catch up with BlackRock and all these Fidelity and all these guys launching the ETF, crypto ETF. But the Canadian one, they launched it. We actually were ahead of the curve here. At one time, we're ahead of the curve, and guess what happened? The liquidity was terrible. There was no liquidity in the market, so whenever you buy and sell something, the pricing was way off. So the actual value of this thing to the actual asset is like there's like this disparity. So liquidity was horrible, so it can never maintain the price of whatever it is on the market. So
yeah, nobody bought it. That's the problem. People didn't buy it.
So liquidity was horrible. So what do you expect? So when you're launching your own company, for example, right? Like Mike, imagine one day, our company goes IPO. We want it to be on the U.S. market because we have the best liquidity there. So that's why everybody aims to be on the U.S. market. Everybody invests in the U.S. market because it's basically the market with the most liquidity.
Point. Good point. What do you think, Kyle? How can we get those dollars into Canada? I think that's, I don't know, that's above our pay grade.
Yeah, so I have a very pessimistic view of the policy around this. So I've come to the point, and this is probably a reflection of my history in Alberta, because Alberta is very much a province where the political frustrations, especially at the federal level, are quite public. And so as long as I can remember, there's been a lot of grievances around, the level of say that we as a province are allowed or are getting in terms of policy decisions. And what I mean by that is essentially, I think a lot of people in this area and my generation have sort of said, we're not going to be able to vote change. We're not going to be able to affect change via voting. And so I would agree, I would definitely have that perspective that, one example that I was talking about recently was a local fintech here, Neo. They've done a lot of really interesting and impressive things. They were the guys behind Skip the Dishes, which was acquired by essentially the company called Just Eat, which was the sort of global juggernaut of that food delivery service as it was still quite nascent. Anyway, so they went out and built Neo, and one of the challenges that what my interpretation of what the things that they're struggling with is this regulatory hurdle, these burdens that fintechs are running into, which a lot of people summarize them as open banking, but essentially the ability for individuals like you and I to consent for our data to be available and shared. It's very difficult to build technology offerings where the free flow of information is not available. So right now, most fintechs that we would use, or most companies that we would interact with, essentially what we're doing is we're giving that app access to our account. So we're essentially giving the login credentials for our bank, and it's essentially skimming that bank information as the source of that information, rather than doing it through conventional technical means. Anyways, without getting into the weeds, I feel like they've been totally handicapped. Their wings have been clipped because the regulatory environment in Canada, they've been talking about open banking for, again, 30 years. None of these ideas are novel. Like if you look around the US, this is so commonplace. Our banking, the technologies that we use in the US are generations better than what we would have available in Canada. Like the level of technical advancement and ease with which you're transacting. And we touched on Bitcoin briefly, like the level of we're talking about stable coins now for foreign exchange transactions where you're paying cents on the dollar, whereas in Canada, some of the exchange fees and the time delays, like it's just incredibly bad. Anyways, so coming back to the point of how do we change it, I personally don't think that we're going to be, it's not going to happen at a policy level. I just don't see it, at least in our generation. I think maybe when the large contingent of people that are, retiring, if they are no longer voting, I think you might get the support to actually vote in some people that want that change. But I don't think that that's going to happen anytime soon. And so I really think it has to be a grassroots, high risk, high reward sort of endeavor where you're essentially going to battle with incumbents, and you're going to have to try and do it in a way that you're going to get around these regulations. You're going to get around, you're essentially going to have to find those loopholes, because I just don't see it taking place in the conventional means that what we think, or what the easiest way would be. I just don't see it happening. And I'm really curious on that note to see what this Alberta separation discussion, what it generates, because even if it doesn't generate actual succession, there's an opportunity for them to do some really interesting independent things. They've led the charge federally with medical records. So similarly, data exchange for medical records. Alberta leads the country in having a provincially run and house database for medical records, so physicians don't have to take your entire medical history by pen and paper every time. And as a result, you can go see different providers and physicians, and they have access to your medical records. Anyways, I think there's an opportunity for these break off, sort of splinter movements, to take charge and take an initiative with some of these topics and actually make change. and get people bought in to say, hey, oh, wait a second, this isn't something we should be afraid of, or, oh, well, we can actually do this really well. Kevin O'Leary's project, we've touched on this in the past. What's it called? Anyways, the data center that he's proposing building in Alberta that's run on natural gas, and it's, you know, huge amounts of energy, huge amounts of compute, which would be unique for Canada. You know, that's the kind of stuff that we need. We need that sort of comparative advantage projects where you need a splinter group to say, this is the status quo isn't going to make it. It's not going to work for us. We need to do something differently. So I think that that's the mentality that we all need to employ, and yeah, just keep pushing like hell to figure out the best way to do it. I don't know if that answers your question, Mike. Bit of a rant.
No, it was good. It was good, but definitely going to take a lot, and a lot at that macro level. You know, we can't fix it in the weeds here. It's got to come from the top, just like adopting AI in the companies. It comes from the top leadership. So,
but I don't. But do you think that it's going to happen? Like, do you think that the policymakers? Do you think that at the federal level, let's say, we're going to see that sort of initiative in the next 20 years?
Pressure, if there's enough pressure put on them, like, yeah, the pressure has to come from, you know, the constituents, the individuals putting pressure on those individuals, but they're the ones that make the policy.
But if 40% of the population is retired and they don't use AI and they don't want to use AI, where is that pressure going to come from? Right? Like, I think that's another big thing that we really haven't talked about much, is the demographic stuff. Right? Like, we as a country, like most other countries, we're in demographic decline. You know, the vast majority of our population is entering retirement. The people that are entering retirement are still voting. And, you know, the whole democratic principle is like two wolves and a sheep deciding who's for lunch. You know, like, if they don't want it, it's not going to happen.
Well, one hand has to talk to one hand has to talk to the other. Everything has to connect. So, you know, immigration. You know, we're taking on so much immigration. I think it's slowed down recently, but maybe we have to look at the type of demographic we're bringing in. If we're bringing in an aging population, that's going to contribute to the problem. So, you know, if we're bringing in a younger generation that can, you know, drive the workforce, you know, fill jobs, fill leadership roles, and influence policy at some point as they advance in their career, that makes more sense. So there has to be some alignment here, like at the government level. Like, what
Immigration is important, Mike, but also emigration, you know, should be a factor the government really should focus on. Because I was reading, you know, there's a staggering number of people that are, you know, smart, wealthy individuals are leaving the country. I don't know if you heard, Jordan Peterson sold his house in Toronto and is moving to the US.
surprising?
So, you know, like, this is the problem. Yes, you know, sure, you're bringing in people, but then the people that have built the country, the people that are you have here that's smart people are leaving the country.
It's like a business, you know, like customer acquisition cost is always much higher than retention. So, you know, think of immigration like customer acquisition. It's very expensive, very difficult to bring people in, the right type of people. However, you know, if they're just leaking out the back and there's immigration, you're losing customers, losing, you know, citizens, good ones, contributing ones. That's a bigger problem. So you're right. That definitely needs to be addressed first. You know, first that needs to be addressed.
Exactly. I think that is the problem, is that a lot of the time, you know, the people forget that, you know, that you have these customers, like you're saying. I like the analogy. You have these customers that are well paying, been with you for a long time, you know, good, stable customers, and you forget them. And then you know, the moment, and you just focus all on new acquisition, these people will leave. And it's costly to bring them back.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, we're not
All
gonna
right.
fix it. We'll think
Final
about
thoughts
it.
before we wrap. What's I guess one piece of advice for people that want to challenge that status quo, and whether it be adopting AI or other technologies or whatever, just breaking from the current path. What sort of suggestions do you guys have, or what are your thoughts on that?
Do you want to shoot, Andrew? But I just want to quickly say that it was going to bother me. That data center from Kevin O'Leary is called Wonder Valley, and the one that Elon built is the Gigafactory. That's that massive Gigafactory. Okay, sorry, off topic. Back to
No, that's
this.
good.
By the way, Meta is building something the size of Manhattan, I heard recently.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's looking to build some mega, data center that's the size of Manhattan. Yeah,
Wow.
so he
It's a
spoke about
race.
that.
It's a
Yeah. So
race to the
anyway,
Gigafactory, the
uh,
Colossus. It's bigger than the Colossus.
yeah, yeah, okay. So I think so to answer your question, Kyle, like a piece of advice is, I would say, be open-minded, question the technology. Don't listen to people that, take the very negative approach to any kind of technology. Be open-minded about it, and take a 5, 10 year look on the technology and see what is the potential of this technology rather than what can it do today. A lot of people have are very short-sighted when it comes to technology. I think people have to have that long-term vision of what the technology can do, and where it can go. And that's going to essentially help you position your business to be ready for those changes.
That's good. And I would add to that, I would start formulating some KPIs around technology to business leaders out there. Just like you have KPIs in other areas of your business, operations, finance, sales, technology, there should be KPIs there. So at least you have something, you have a North Star there and you're driving the needle forward. I'm not saying what they should be. Maybe it's some sort of adoption. Maybe it's something like, every employee has to have or use some level of AI in a certain workflow, whatever it may be. There has to be KPIs at the high level, and that has to be constantly monitored. As a business leader, you have to constantly look at that on a monthly, quarterly basis, saying, "Hey, you know what? Are we driving the needle forward on our technology adoption or the tech side of our business?" So that's one way. That's one quick way that businesses could start to really ensure that they're continuing to move the needle on adopting some of the technology that's out there, or technology like Andrew mentioned that's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, I like
Kyle,
those are good options.
what do you
I'm
think,
going to
Kyle?
steal one thing that Andrew said earlier, which was the Elon case study. And I think we as a country or we individually, we need to take bigger swings. I think we limit ourselves, we sort of restrain our ambition because we're Canadian and we've been brought up in this climate. And what we're talking about this session, we've all experienced it, we've all seen it firsthand. And I think in order to change that culture, the first thing you can do is sort of say internally to yourselves, like, we're going to take bigger swings. We're going to make a conscious effort to try and do, big, ambitious, bold things. And if you fail, you fail, right? You learn something, you move on. Like, that comes with the territory. I don't think we're actually afraid of failing per se. I think, there's a lot more to it than that. But, I think we just need to make a concerted effort to make bigger swings and see what works and what doesn't. So,
And if you
and
want to read more on that, what Kyle's point, read the book Good to Great. Good to Great, that summarizes everything you just said there, Kyle.
awesome. There you go. All right. With that, thanks for joining us. We look forward to next week or the next episode, chatting further on other topics like this. So if you have any questions, feel free to shoot a comment below. And thanks for joining us.